presentation from Yanxin Luo, and my topic is analyzing how Chinese American are represented in 10 recent TV series, maybe more than 10. So, my topic is analyzing how Chinese Americans are represented in 10 recent TV series. Right now it shows 13. And I classify into three big sections, and they are collectivism, social problem, and stereotype, four big parts. And there's few of the TV show are have comments in showing a specific topic, and I classify them into these three parts. So this are the few TV series that I have chose from the internet. They are Fresh Off the Boat, Martial Law, Desperate Housewife, Into the Badland, Iron Fist, Wu Assassin, Glee, Awkward, Grey's Anatomy, Warrior, House of Cards, Silicon Valley, and Space Force. In all these TV series, sometimes the representation may not be the main character. It can be some sidekick or some not important character, but they all do a really great job on showing the representation of Chinese American. Okay, let's start it. So the first one is collectivism. So this is one characteristic that is well performed by Chinese American groups, no matter if they are from China or America. Collectivism is a signature characteristic for Chinese American that makes Chinese American and European American fairly different. With these three TV series, the whole story is fantasized. Like Warrior is a fantasized story that happened at the end of 19th century in San Francisco. And Iron Fist is the Marvel movie, and Wu Assassin is also a fantasized action series. But all these Chinese characters in this TV show are depicted as gang members. The time setting of these stories are changing, but the essential value of the gang stays the same. This is how American media reflects Chinese Americans' collectivism in another perspective. In this series, the existence of gang represents the collectivism of Chinese American. They came to this unfamiliar land, joined the gang group, or live under their protection in Chinatown. There is a reciprocal relationship between these groups and residents in Chinatown. Gangs rely on these residents to survive, and they offer protection or arbitrary between conflicts. In my perspective, I cannot say this representation are very often or realistic among those 10 TV series. I only find these three that have the presentation of gang members in their story. And these three TV series are like fantasized stories. So I do not see this representation in other TV series with more realistic story or setting. I observe that Chinese Americans are less prevalently represented in gang-like way in this fantasy setting, especially in a realistic setting. This is not an image that is commonly presented in American TV series. If this image or presentation is not commonly presented in most TV series, it's possible this is not a common image for Chinese American in American audience mind. I can't say this representation of collectivism is positive. This is a way of showing collectivism in a very radical way. But it is also narrowing the deeper meaning of the collectivism into gang member gathering, which is not providing a positive image for Chinese American. My guess for this representation is if audience start to adapt this representation, there could be a new negative stereotype coming out. And this collectivism and different perspectives that reflect that Chinese Americans like to join a Chinese group when they are arriving in a familiar land. For this part, I think it perfectly representing Chinese Americans' collectivism. Then we have social problem. The social problem I divided into two. One is the problem in warrior, which is Chinese American hard American middle class interest, and the other one is Gray's anatomy, which is illegal immigrants. So for the social problem section, the first one is warrior. This is a story about a Chinese young man who come to San Francisco in U.S. around the end of 19th century. This show spent a lot of time describing the conflicts between Chinese laborers and European immigrants. Of course, cheap labor is always welcome by the American business owners, but this action hurt not just European immigrants' interests, it also pushed European immigrants into a difficult time. European immigrants blame them for taking their job away, and the conflicts become more and more aggressive. This is just like the same problem that American society is facing right now. Immigrants are creating a threat towards American citizens. This is a very similar situation. As immigrants are creating as more Chinese immigrants immigrate into America, Americans start to have concern about when their job will be taken by another Chinese immigrants with a lower paycheck. Besides hurting American middle class interests, another social problem is illegal immigrants. In Gray's Anatomy, there is a scene where illegal immigrants refuse to accept surgery because he's afraid his identity as an illegal immigrant will be exposed. This identity does represent a group of Chinese Americans who identify as illegal immigrants. 3 decades ago, the American dream and the land of opportunity were also tempting things for Chinese students and business owners. Some of them got here through legal channels, some did not. They seek to achieve success in this land of opportunity, but sadly, most of them end up staying in the same Chinese restaurant for the rest of their life. This is a negative representation, but there is some authenticity in it. This representation is not meant to smear Chinese American, it is to state a prevalent image. And that is the stereotype. I classify stereotype in different sections, in 4 sections, which is education, kung fu, and social identity. The last one is geek image. So for the first one, this is a picture from Glee. It's a pretty popular TV show. And this is a picture when Mike's parents, which his father, came to school and talk with the teacher about his son got an A minus on his chemistry test, and he stated an A minus is an Asian F. This shows Chinese parents' high standard on their academic requirement. Another thing is, I find out that Chinese Americans seems to hold a pretty high standard on their kids with completely different system of evaluation than American. So for the just like the parents said, an A minus is an Asian F. Seems like the parents is more prefer a more explicit way, which is to score from an examination or a paper. But American teachers more prefer to value students' personality or character rather than their grade. Here's another example from TV show Fresh Off the Boat. When this student showed her mom his report card with all A's, her mom did not give him enough compliment. She actually think that it's the reason why her kid can get an A in the school because the school is too easy for the student. This is the second stereotype, kung fu part. For this part, I choose three TV series. They're Iron Fist, Wu Assassin, and Into the Badland. So for this part, this is a prevalent stereotype. This representation is presented not just in the media, also in the real life. Every time this representation come up, it's I'm really getting fatigued at seeing people in American TV series learning Chinese Kung Fu or Chinese American whose role is someone who knows Kung Fu. This is not a negative or positive representation, it just does not perfectly represent Chinese American in some perspectives. This is part of our culture, we are familiar with it, but it is not something in our daily life. Like, not every Chinese American know how to practice Kung Fu every day in their life. The next one is social identity changing. So I choose Desperate Housewife, Grey's Anatomy, Martial Law, and House of Cards. Here's two pictures. One picture is the maid Xiao Mei from Desperate Housewife, and the other one is the character from House of Cards, whose name is Xander Feng. So, in the TV series, Chinese American social role or occupation has become more and more varied than before. Chinese Americans' character role in early time is mainly servant, maid, or nanny. But now Chinese Americans are not just being portrayed like that. They have different roles in this TV series: a maid in Desperate Housewife, illegal immigrants in Grey's Anatomy, police in Martial Law, and the Chinese businessman that has the power to facilitate a rare earth trade in House of Cards. This reflects that Chinese Americans' occupation are no longer limited to a job like servant or maid. Chinese American can earn a role as a business manager, doctor, or scientist in an institute. This is a positive representation that shows Chinese American social status is changing in a generally positive way. The last part is geek image. I choose these two from two very popular TV shows from Silicon Valley and Space Force, and they're all this actor is called Yang, which is Chinese American. We can see his image is like with the glasses and with a sweater or a check shirt. So, just like I mentioned with education and social identity stereotype above, one thing we can see from Silicon Valley and Space Force is that we can see Chinese American actors take on roles like scientists and researchers. They are characters who are a little detached and dedicated to their own research. And the frequency of this representation is maintained within a normal range. I think this representation does not positively represent Chinese American, as this image of geek should not be matched with all Chinese American. But since this representation continues in a normal frequency, it does not sway or influence people's perception. That's my content analysis on Chinese American. Thank you.